Chapter 16, Part 1 of Social Statics by Herbert Spencer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16, The Rights of Women, Part 1. Section 1. Equity knows no difference of sex. In its vocabulary, the word man must be understood in a generic and not in a specific sense. The law of equal freedom manifestly applies to the whole race, female as well as male. The same a priori reasoning which establishes that law for men, chapters 3 and 4, may be used with equal cogency on behalf of women. The moral sense, by virtue of which the masculine mind responds to that law, exists in the feminine mind as well. Hence, the several rights deducible from that law must appertain equally to both sexes. This might have been thought a self-evident truth, needing only to be stated to meet with universal acceptation. There are many, however, who either tacitly or in so many words express their dissent from it. For what reasons they do so does not appear. They admit the axiom that human happiness is the divine will, from which axiom what we call rights are primarily derived, and why the differences of bodily organization and those trifling mental variations which distinguish female from male should exclude one half of the race from the benefits of this ordination remains to be shown. The onus of proof lies on those who affirm that such is the fact, and it would be perfectly in order to assume that the law of equal freedom comprehends both sexes until the contrary has been demonstrated. But without taking advantage of this, suppose we go at once into the controversy. 3 positions only are open to us. It may be said that women have no rights at all, that their rights are not so great as those of men, or that they are equal to those of men. Whoever maintains the first of these dogmas, that women have no rights at all, must show that the Creator intended women to be wholly at the mercy of men, their happiness, their liberties, their lives at men's disposal, or in other words, that they were meant to be treated as creatures of an inferior order. Few will have the hardihood to assert this. From the second proposition, that the rights of women are not so great as those of men, there immediately arise such queries as, if they are not so great, by how much are they less? What is the exact ratio between the legitimate claims of the two sexes? How shall we tell which rights are common to both, and where those of the male exceed those of the female? Who can show us a scale that will serve for the apportionment? Or, putting the question practically, it is required to determine by some logical method whether the Turk is justified in plunging an offending Circassian into the Bosphorus, whether the rights of women were violated by that Athenian law which allowed a citizen, under certain circumstances, to sell his daughter or sister, whether our own statute, which permits a man to beat his wife in moderation, and to imprison her in any room in his house, is morally defensible, whether it is equitable that a married woman should be incapable of holding property, whether a husband may justly take possession of his wife's earnings against her will, as our law allows him to do, and so forth. These and a multitude of similar problems present themselves for solution. Some principle rooted in the nature of things has to be found, by which they may be scientifically decided not on grounds of expediency, but in some definite philosophical way. Does anyone holding the doctrine that women's rights are not so great as men's think he can find such a principle? If not, there remains no alternative but to take up the third position, that the rights of women are equal with those of men. Section 2. Whoso urges the mental inferiority of women in bar of their claim to equal rights with men may be met in various ways. In the first place, the alleged fact may be disputed. A defender of her sex might name many whose achievements in government, in science, in literature, and in art have obtained no small share of renown. Powerful and sagacious queens the world has seen in plenty, from Zenobia down to the empresses Catherine and Maria Theresa. In the exact sciences, Mrs. Somerville, Miss Herschel, and Miss Zornlin have gained applause. In political economy, Miss Martineau. In general philosophy, Madame de Staël. In politics, Madame Roland. Poetry has its Tighes, its Haymanses, its Landons, its Brownings. The drama, its Joanna Bailey. And fiction, its Austens, Bremers, Gores, Dudevant, etc., without end. In sculpture, fame has been acquired by a princess. A picture like The Momentous Question is tolerable proof of female capacity for painting. And on the stage, it is certain that women are on a level with men if they do not even bear away the palm. Joining to such facts the important consideration that women have always been and are still placed at a disadvantage in every department of learning, thought, or skill, seeing that they are not admissible to the academies and universities in which men get their training, that the kind of life they have to look forward to does not present so great a range of ambitions, that they are rarely exposed to that most powerful of all stimuli, necessity, that the education custom dictates for them is one that leaves uncultivated many of the higher faculties, and that the prejudice against bluestockings, hitherto so prevalent amongst men, has greatly tended to deter women from the pursuit of literary honors. Adding these considerations to the above facts, we shall see good reason for thinking that the alleged inferiority of the feminine mind is by no means self-evident. But waiving this point, let us contend with the proposition on its own premises. Let it be granted that the intellect of woman is less profound than that of man, that she is more uniformly ruled by feeling, more impulsive, and less reflective than man is. Let all this be granted, and let us now see what basis such an admission affords to the doctrine that the rights of women are not coextensive with those of men. 1. If rights are to be meted out to the two sexes in the ratio of their respective amounts of intelligence, then must the same system be acted upon in the apportionment of rights between man and man. whence must proceed all those multiplied perplexities already pointed out. 2. In like manner it will follow, that as there are here and there women of unquestionably greater ability than the average of men, some women ought to have greater rights than some men. 3. Wherefore, instead of a certain fixed allotment of rights to all males, and another to all females, the hypothesis itself involves an infinite gradation of rights, irrespective of sex entirely, and sends us once more in search of those unattainable desiderata, a standard by which to measure capacity, and another by which to measure rights. Not only, however, does the theory thus fall to pieces under the mere process of inspection, it is absurd on the very face of it, when freed from the disguise of hackneyed phraseology. For what is it that we mean by rights? Nothing else than the freedom to exercise the faculties. And what is the meaning of the assertion that woman is mentally inferior to man? Simply that her faculties are less powerful. What then does the dogma, that because woman is mentally inferior to man, she has less extensive rights, amount to? Just this, that because woman has weaker faculties than man, she ought not to have like liberty with him to exercise the faculties she has. Section 3. Belief always bears the impress of character, is, in fact, its product. Anthropomorphism sufficiently proves this. Men's wishes eventually get expressed in their faiths, their real faiths, that is, not their nominal ones. Pull to pieces a man's theory of things, and you will find it based upon facts collected at the suggestion of his desires. A fiery passion consumes all evidences opposed to its gratification, and fusing together those that serve its purpose, casts them into weapons by which to achieve its end. There is no deed so vicious but what the actor makes for himself an excuse to justify, and if the deed is often repeated, such excuse becomes a creed. The vilest transactions on record, Bartholomew massacres and the like, have had defenders, nay, have been inculcated as fulfillments of the divine will. There is wisdom in the fable which represents the wolf as raising accusations against the lamb before devouring it. It is always thus amongst men. No invader ever raised standard, but persuaded himself that he had a just cause. Sacrifices and prayers have preceded every military expedition, from one of Caesar's campaigns down to a border foray. God is on our side is the universal cry. Each of two conflicting nations consecrates its flags, and whichever conquers sings a Te Deum. Attila conceived himself to have a divine claim to the dominion of the earth. The Spaniards subdued the Indians under plea of converting them to Christianity, hanging 13 refractory ones in honor of Jesus Christ and his apostles. And we English justify our colonial aggressions by saying that the Creator intends the Anglo-Saxon race to people the world. An insatiate lust of conquest transmutes manslaying into a virtue. and amongst more races than one, implacable revenge has made assassination a duty. A clever theft was praiseworthy amongst the Spartans, and it is equally so amongst Christians, provided it be on a sufficiently large scale. Piracy was heroism with Jason and his followers, was so also with the Norsemen, is so still with the Malays, and there is never wanting some golden fleece for a pretext. Amongst money-hunting people, a man is commended in proportion to the number of hours he spends in business. In our day, the rage for accumulation has apotheosized work, and even the miser is not without a code of morals by which to defend his parsimony. The ruling classes argue themselves into the belief that property should be represented rather than person, that the landed interest should preponderate. The pauper is thoroughly persuaded that he has a right to relief. The monks held printing to be an invention of the devil, and some of our modern sectaries regard their refractory brethren as under demoniacal possession. Footnote: Speech of Mr. Garland, one of the Conference Methodists. End footnote. To the clergy, nothing is more obvious than that a state church is just, and essential to the maintenance of religion. The sinecurist thinks himself rightly indignant at any disregard of his vested interests, and so on throughout society. Perhaps the slave owner's assertion that Negroes are not human beings, and the kindred dogma of the Mahometans that women have no souls, are the strangest samples of convictions so formed. Footnote: Though Washington Irving has pointed out that the Koran does not teach this, he has not shown that Mahomet's followers do not hold it. Most likely the Mahometan faith has undergone corruptions similar to those suffered by Christianity. End footnote. In these, as in the foregoing cases, selfishness finds out a satisfactory reason why it may do what it wills, collects and distorts, exaggerates and suppresses, so as ultimately to cheat itself into the desired conclusion. Does anyone doubt that men can really believe things thus palpably opposed to the plainest facts? Does anyone assert that those who profess opinions so manifestly absurd must be hypocrites? Let him beware. Let him consider whether selfishness has not deluded him into absurdities almost as gross. The laws of England and the public opinion of England countenance doctrines nearly as preposterous as these that look to us inconceivable. Nay, the very same doctrines somewhat softened down. For what, when closely examined, is this notion that the rights of women are not equal with those of men? Simply an evanescent form of the theory that women have no souls. Section 4. That a people's condition may be judged by the treatment which women receive under it is a remark that has become almost trite. The facts, of which this remark is a generalization, are abundant enough. Look where we will, we find that just as far as the law of the strongest regulates the relationships between man and man, does it regulate the relationships between man and woman. To the same extent that the triumph of might over right is seen in a nation's political institutions, it is seen in its domestic ones. Despotism in the state is necessarily associated with despotism in the family. The two, being alike moral in their origin, cannot fail to coexist. Turkey, Egypt, India, China, Russia, the feudal states of Europe, it needs but to name these to suggest hosts of facts illustrative of such an accordance. Yet, strangely enough, almost all of us who let fall this observation overlook its application to ourselves. Here we sit over our tea tables and pass criticisms upon national character, or philosophize upon the development of civilized institutions, quietly taking it for granted that we are civilized, that the state of things we live under is the right one, or thereabouts. Although the people of every past age have thought the like, and have been uniformly mistaken, there are still many to whom it never occurs that we may be mistaken too. Amidst their strictures upon the ill treatment of women in the East, and the unhealthy social arrangements implied by it, most persons do not see that the same connection between political and domestic oppression exists in this England of ours at the present hour, and that in as far as our laws and customs violate the rights of humanity by giving the richer classes power over the poorer, in so far do they similarly violate those rights by giving the stronger sex power over the weaker. Yet, looking at the matter apart from prejudice, and considering all institutions to be, as they are, products of the popular character, we cannot avoid confessing that such must be the case. To the same extent that the old leaven of tyranny shows itself in the transactions of the Senate, it will creep out in the doings of the household. If injustice sways men's public acts, it will inevitably sway their private ones also. The mere fact, therefore, that oppression marks the relationship of outdoor life is ample proof that it exists in the relationships of the fireside. Section 5. The desire to command is essentially a barbarous desire. Whether seen in the ukase of a czar, or in the order of an Eton bully to his fag, it is alike significant of brutality. Command cannot be otherwise than savage, for it implies an appeal to force, should force be needful. Behind its "you shall" there lies the scarcely hidden "if you won't, I'll make you." Command is the growl of coercion crouching in ambush, or we might aptly term it violence in a latent state. All its accessories, its frown, its voice, its gestures, prove it akin to the ferocity of the uncivilized man. Command is the foe of peace, for it breeds war of words and feelings, sometimes of deeds. It is inconsistent with the first law of morality. It is radically wrong. All the barbarisms of the past have their types in the present. All the barbarisms of the past grew out of certain dispositions. Those dispositions may be weakened, but they are not extinct. and so long as they exist, there must be manifestations of them. What we commonly understand by command and obedience are the modern forms of bygone despotism and slavery. Philosophically considered, they are identical with these. Despotism may be defined as the making of another's will bend to the fulfillment of our own, and its counterpart, slavery, as the having our own will subordinated to the will of another. True, we apply the terms only when the rule of one will over another is extreme, when the one wholly or almost wholly extinguishes the other. But if the subjection of man to man is bad when carried to its full extent, it is bad in any degree. If every man has freedom to exercise his faculties within specified limits, and if, as we have seen, Chapter 8, slavery is wrong because it transgresses that freedom and makes one man use his powers to satisfy not his own wants, but the wants of another, then whatsoever involves command, or whatsoever implies obedience, is wrong also, seeing that it too necessitates the subserviency of one man's actions to the gratifications of another. You must do not as you will, but as I will, is the basis of every mandate, whether used by a planter to his Negro, or by a husband to his wife. Not satisfied with being sole ruler over his own doings, the petty autocrat oversteps the boundary dividing his sphere of action from his neighbor's, and takes upon himself to direct his or her doings also. It matters not, in point of principle, whether such domination is entire or partial. To whatever extent the will of the one is overborne by the will of the other, to that extent the parties are tyrant and slave. There are, without doubt, many who will rebel against this doctrine. There are many who hold that the obedience of one human being to another is proper, virtuous, praiseworthy. There are many to whose moral sense command is not repugnant. There are many who think the subjection of the weaker sex to the stronger legitimate and beneficial. Let them not be deceived. Let them remember that a nation's institutions and beliefs are determined by its character. Let them remember that men's perceptions are warped by their passions. Let them remember that our social state proves our superior feelings to be very imperfectly developed. And let them remember that, as many customs deemed right by our ancestors appeared detestable to us, so many customs which we think proper, our more civilized descendants may regard with aversion, even as we loathe those barbarian manners which forbid a woman to sit at table with her lord and master, so may mankind one day loathe that subserviency of wife to husband which existing laws enjoin. As elsewhere shown, moral sense becomes a trustworthy guide only when it has logic for an interpreter. Nothing but its primary intuition is authoritative. From the fundamental law to which it gives utterance, reason has to deduce the consequences, and from these, when correctly drawn, there is no appeal. It proves nothing, therefore, that there are some who do not feel command to be improper. It is for such to inquire whether command is or is not consistent with that first principle expressive of the divine will, that axiom to which the moral sense responds, and they will find that, thus judged by the law of equal freedom, command is at once pronounced wrong, for whoso commands manifestly claims more freedom than whoso is commanded. End of chapter 16, part 1.